Hare Krishna. Question: how can we overcome loneliness? Answer: loneliness can be dealt with at a social, psychological and spiritual levels. At a social level, we all have different dynamics in our relationships with different people, depending on the different natures that people may have, depending on the specific kind of interactions we have had with different people, and depending on the specific busyness level of different people at different times. Now, loneliness, the simplest way at which we deal with loneliness is by developing connections, by finding like-minded people and developing relationships with them. Now, there is the problem that often we interact with a lot of people and we interact with them superficially. So we have to, whatever interactions we have, whatever relationships we have, we need to shortlist some people with whom we would like to develop more relationships. Now, loneliness is more a state of the mind, and it doesn't depend so much on how many people with which we are interacting at a practical level. People can be in crowded cities, people can be in a crowded local where they're squeezed together with others and still the heart can be lonely. So we have to see that first of all, loneliness is more a state of the mind, but that it is a state of the mind does not mean that it has to be dealt with only at the emotional or mental level or psychological level. That what it means is that we have to also look at the social, the emotional and the spiritual causes of that state of the mind. So at the first level, for dealing with the state of the mind, we can see who are all the people with whom we are interacting in our day-to-day lives, and check who are the people among them with whom we can make our relationships deeper, with whom we can connect at a stronger level, at a deeper level, at a more meaningful and fulfilling level. And after we shortlist some people, now this shortlisting, how to do that, I'll talk a little bit more when we talk about dealing with loneliness at a psychological level. But it generally doesn't have to be just on peer pressure or social evaluations of who we should be mixing with. There are certain people who are glamorized in any social group, and everyone wants the pride of association with that person. So now pride of proximity with that person. Oh, I know so and so, I know so and so. So now that sort of thing, if we base our relationships largely on those who are considered very important or glamorous or very valued in a particular social circle, then we may or may not get that expectation fulfilled, because different people have different natures, different people have different business levels. So we have to be realistic in looking at, okay, these are the people with whom I want to develop a relationship, and then we can see what are the practical steps that we can do for developing that relationship. And as we shortlist, this will not be a static process, it will be a dynamic process wherein we will find that sometimes we have greater opportunity to connect with some people, sometimes we have lesser opportunity to connect with some people, but overall we can move onwards in our connection with by overall having a short list of people with whom we want to have closer relationships, and then investing time in that relationship. So often if we have too much expectation from a relationship, then that expectation itself creates a feeling of rejection or negligence, and that can create a feeling of loneliness. So instead of seeing relationships primarily as centered on what we expect, We can see relationships also as an opportunity to contribute, and that means building relationships is like gardening, and not just gardening in general, but gardening like making orchards where we are building plantations, or where we are actually growing fruit trees, say. Then sometimes they take years to fructify. So if a person who is gardening has too much expectations, and too much expectations initially itself, then that can create a lot of disappointment, and then thereby resulting in loneliness. So if we shift that focus from expectation to contribution in the relationship, okay, what can I do and what can I bring into this relationship? Then that way we will always have something to do, and we won't feel so lonely. Now, so shortlisting the people with whom we want to have closer relationships, and then working intelligently to make that relationship closer. That's what we can do at a social level. Then at a psychological or emotional or mental level, we need to look at our own nature. And some people are introvert, some people are extrovert. It's a broad character division. And the important point is that we shouldn't assume that we are lonely because others call us as a loner. It may well be that yes, introverts, they get strength when they are alone. They need to have their own space and time in which they can think clearly, they can regroup, and then they can move onwards doing things. So similarly, we also need to check things out and move onwards by dwelling on what our nature is, and not letting others' perception of us determine our own conception of ourselves. That means, because others say, oh, this person always stays alone, so therefore this person is a loner, and this person must be lonely, and this person must develop more relationships. No, if we are introverts, then, and if we are satisfied, if we are peaceful in being alone, we don't have to artificially, unnaturally put pressure on ourselves to connect more with people. The important point is, we have to say which is the situation for us in which we can function best. So it is not that introvert people dislike others, it is just that they can deal with their social stamina is limited, and they can deal with people in small manageable divisions, few people with intervals in between them. So we largely live in an extrovert society, especially a society that glamorizes the extrovert achiever. The idea that a person, as soon as the person enters the room, all heads turn toward that person, and this person behaves in a way, acts and talks and walks in a way that dazzles and captivates everyone. So often a person's value and success is evaluated based on how much that person can attract others to oneself. And especially this sort of, those with the introvert nature take that definition as their own definition of success, then they will always feel lonely, rejected, insecure, inferior. So we don't have to do that. If we are comfortable being to ourselves, and we need time to regroup for ourselves, then we can take that and not let others' perceptions or others' expectations determine our own conception of ourselves. So at a psychological level, we need to understand our nature, and then we need to understand what kind of relationships do we need. Often extrovert people, they need to interact with a lot of people, and even if those interactions are not very deep, that doesn't matter so much for them. They need to interact with a lot of people. Whereas introvert people, they can interact with few people, but they can go deep in that interaction. And in that way, we can, by understanding our nature, we can take steps for overcoming our feelings of loneliness. So sometimes We may not be feeling lonely, but just because others call us a loner, we may think, oh, I am lonely, I am lonely. No, we may well be satisfied in our relationship with others, with whatever state we are in our relationships. So understand yourself, know thyself, as it is said. So that applies not only to understanding ourselves as souls, it also applies to understanding our own nature and acting accordingly. Then, after that, we need to ultimately look at relationships and the challenge of overcoming loneliness at a spiritual level. Ultimately, ekastu, the Bhagavatam says that we are all alone in our journey. We may have families, we may have friends, we may have a social circle. At the same time, we also need to recognize that we are ultimately alone. As Srila Prabhupada says that we all have to fly our own plane. And so recognizing our existential loneliness is foundational for taking responsibility for our own lives, materially and spiritually. So spiritually, as souls, we are alone. That means whatever relationships we have with others, those relationships are not going to be eternal, and they are not necessarily at a level of who we are, at the level of souls. So at the level of the soul's longing eternally is for Krishna. All feelings of loneliness ultimately stem from the soul's longing for Krishna. And to the extent we can learn to relate with Krishna, we can develop our relationship with Krishna, to that extent we can overcome the feelings of loneliness in the most deep and most fulfilling way. So we have to, at a spiritual level, in the various limbs of bhakti, we can find out which are the ways in which we can feel the presence of Krishna the most. We can feel the greatest connection with Krishna. For some devotees it may be in some devotees it may be in scripture study, for others it may be in verse recitation, for others it may be in deity worship, for others it may be in hearing classes, whatever. And of course, through all of these we can feel the presence of Krishna at different times, but each of us will find that in one of these activities we may feel the strongest and the deepest connection, and often the most easily accessible connection in one of these activities. And so we can, whenever we start feeling lonely, we can start connecting with Krishna through these activities, through that particular devotional activity, and deal with the challenge of loneliness at the deepest level. So apart from that, now the spiritual connection with Krishna is the ultimate solution, but it may not always be the immediate solution, and it is not also the substitute for the immediate. So that means that if a person is feeling lonely, we should not think that I don't need any relationships, I will just have a relationship with Krishna and I will be satisfied in that relationship. Quite often that doesn't work. Our relationship, our ultimate relationship with Krishna, which you could say is our vertical relationship, that is not a replacement, but it is a complement for our horizontal relationships. So our horizontal relationships with others, they become more meaningful and they become more fulfilling when we also have a vertical relationship with Krishna. But so when I talked about the dealing with loneliness at a social and psychological level, it was largely with respect to the horizontal relationships. And with the vertical relationship, we can focus on developing our own devotional connection with Krishna and seek shelter in that connection, and thus strengthen the vertical relationship also. Now, while developing this vertical and horizontal relationship, we can, the spiritual conception, the spiritual understanding of life, the devotional vision of life can also help us in our social, in the social and the emotional or psychological aspects of overcoming loneliness. And so how does that happen? At a social level, the bhakti vision helps us to see others not just in terms of their relationship with us, but also in terms of their relationship with Krishna. So in every relationship, Krishna becomes a third partner for us, and this helps us to act not just in terms only of how that person is acting. We can also see in terms of how I can act in the situation by which Krishna will be pleased. That means even if some person is going through some difficulty, and if that person is neglected or rejected us, and that is causing us loneliness, then praying for that person, for that person's well-being, praying for that person's, if that person has committed a mistake, has disappointed or betrayed us in a relationship. Now we may feel very far away from praying for that person, but we can pray for that person not just for that person's good, but for our own good also. Because praying for that person is not only going to help that person, it is going to help us also. How? Because prayer, when we pray for others, so it's not only Krishna's blessings coming to that person, but also because we are praying to Krishna, we are connecting with Krishna, and that itself can lift us up. So also in relationships, we all often experience conflicts and stress and tension, because we all have our rough side and others have their rough side also. So praying that we be able to control our impulses, we be praying that we be able to deal with our own negativities, and others be able to deal with their own negativities, that can take the relationship to a higher reciprocal rather than vindictive level. That vindictive means, oh, you did this, I'll do that to you, and I did that, so that person will do something to us. But more of a spiritual reciprocal level, where rather than we blaming each other, we help each other according to whatever our capacity is. And also at a psychological level, we can understand that we are all related. Whatever nature we have right now, our relationship with our mind and body, they are temporary, but that connection is important for us. So even if sometimes some people are introvert and they long to be extrovert, some people are extrovert and they this may be a little few because of the social glamorization of the extrovert person, but sometimes extroverts long to be introverts, and like that at a psychological level, we may have a particular set of talents, and we may be attracted and want to have a relationship with someone who just doesn't have interest in the kind of talents that we have, in the nature that we have, and then that creates that frustrates our expectations. So by recognizing that whatever is our nature, whatever is our present situation, that is an arrangement by God, by Krishna, for our growth, and by accepting it in that way, accepting our nature, seeing that nature as an arrangement for our growth, we can deal with the situation, accept it, and act in a way in which we can best move onwards. So Sharanagati, surrender to Krishna, also means anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam. That means accepting that which is favorable, rejecting that which is unfavorable. So whatever is our nature, we accept it and we move onwards. And whatever is unfavorable and negativity, discouragement, all that comes and discourages in our life, we reject that. And in that way, at a social level, at an emotional level, and a spiritual level, we can overcome the feelings of loneliness. Thank you. Hare Krishna.